So, on our panel we have Izzy Imran, and you're a Conservative councillor on the Dacorum Borough Council for Hertfordshire, and you organise events and the leadership of the Christian Conservative Fellowship. I'm glad, my notes are all right so far. We're doing well. We're doing well. You've stood as a parliamentary candidate, and previously you've worked in international creative industries before setting up a design and consultation business. Excellent. So it's great to have you on the panel. Welcome. And welcome to Sir Simon Hughes. That's the only time I'm going to use the Sir. So welcome, Simon, who is Chancellor of London South Bank University and Vice President of the Liberal Democrat Christian Forum, and was an MP for Bermondsey from 1983 to 2015. And has also served as President and Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats, and was a Justice Minister in the coalition government. So welcome, Simon. So as I kind of hinted at before, the aim of this session is to explore how we can connect local action and community issues to political and policy discussions, particularly exploring how local churches and community members can engage with and influence political representatives and policymakers. And we'll hopefully also explore a little bit about the role and influence of faith in politics. So just to start off, I'm going to ask you, if I may, each of you a question to answer. So Izzy, what opportunities do you think there are for churches and church members to work with and influence local authorities and local government decisions? And what advice would you have for those thinking of doing this?
Okay, so there's lots and lots of opportunities. I've been involved now for about 7 years. I've been a borough councillor for 7 years now, and I was surprised once I started knocking how easily the door opened and how accessible it actually was. So for a long time I just thought politics was something that was out there and only people from certain parts of society could get involved in. Actually, they're desperately crying out for people to get involved at all levels. I think it's very sad, but some of the politicians that have been attacked have illustrated just how easy it is to speak to members in political circles. They need your ideas. They have stood to be your voice, and if you never speak to them, they'll never be your voice, basically. Should I carry on?
Yeah, please do.
So I got involved in politics because I was really passionate about social housing. I believe as Christians, God wants us to fulfill our full potential. And I was in a position when my partner left, and I had me and my young son as a single parent, and commercial rents meant that I just couldn't really fulfill what I believed God had called me to do. And then I was eventually housed in a council flat, and it meant that I could work. I didn't have to be burdened to society or in that trap. And I always believed that when I got the opportunity, I would go back and get involved in social housing. And it was a springboard for me, because it meant I remember that when they rang me, my first thought was, now I can afford to go to university. And I got a degree, and I worked in the fashion industry for about 20 years, won lots of awards. And this is not me saying, oh, look at me, I'm great. It's me saying, if people got involved, made things accessible, people would feel their potential and give back to society. So I sit on 2 housing committees, one specifically for the council overview and scrutiny committee, and I get to make decisions about how housing is allocated. If I wasn't there, my voice wouldn't be heard, and the policy would no doubt be different. I give up about 8 hours a week of my time, and then there's another committee where I hear the voice of tenants and leaseholders, and they tell me about their experience, and we use that to shape council policy to make sure that anything that we legislate for is fit for purpose and is ultimately going to make people's lives better. And I spend maybe an hour a week on that, which is not a lot to ask. So it just shows that no matter how busy you are, you can get involved and you can dramatically change somebody's life. You can dramatically change your community.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll come back and pick up some of those things as we have developed the discussion. Simon, wondering if you could tell us a bit. So, from your years as an MP and as a government minister, what do you think the effective community engagement with national politics really looks like, and when have you seen it done well?
Sorry.
Can we have the microphones?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. It's very good to be here. Apart from for 1.5 hours in the last year, I love you a lot, David, but I guess you might have been on the other side of Anfield when Liverpool played Everton, and I was supporting Liverpool, and you may have been supporting the other team, and we thought we were going to lose to you, but in the end we won, so that was all right.
So that was the second panel.
Coming to the question you really asked me, or the issue you wanted to raise, I reflected back knowing I was coming over issues where community engagement has been significant, locally, regionally, or nationally, or internationally. And some of those areas of engagement have worked and some haven't. So there's no guarantee that there is success. You can have the best campaign in the world, you can mobilize the community wonderfully. It doesn't necessarily mean you win every battle. And sometimes you may not win the war either on this life. Let me take some examples. I'll start with the footballing example that, again, David, you'd understand well. After the terrible tragedy at Hillsborough, when all those people were killed at the ground in Sheffield, when Liverpool playing away, it effectively took 30 years of campaigning for there to be anything like justice for the families of the survivors. And that was community campaigning at its most poignant and intense. It was about justice for people who were innocent participants at a football game. The church played a big role in that because the Bishop of Liverpool, the Anglican Bishop of Liverpool, and the other church leaders were very engaged in that campaign. Hugely engaged in that campaign, in many ways sort of chaired and led some of the groups. And Bishop of Liverpool took that to Parliament, took that nationally and so on. And in the end, of course, nobody can bring back those who died, but I think you'd find that many of the families feel that at least they have been vindicated and some justice has been done. So that's an example of really strong community engagement delivering result. There's a London example, which is more recent. After the tragedy of Grenfell Tower, the community has come together wonderfully well to make sure, firstly, that people don't forget. Secondly, to make sure that those who died and those who were bereaved are supported and remembered. Thirdly, to make sure that, and I think this will happen, and if you've ever driven past on the Westway, you'll see there is still a tower block in cladding, but I think the intention now is that there will either be no replacement block that will come down, or there'll be a garden, or there'll be a memorial, a bit like in New York after 9/11. Again, the church was hugely involved. I know from my bit of the church, which is the Church of England, that the local bishop, the Bishop of Kensington, was much involved, and other church leaders across the communities, free churches, black-led churches, all sorts of churches were involved. That hasn't yet been entirely successful. It has taken a frustratingly long time for the people to be housed who should have been housed much more quickly. I think politics failed to respond quickly. And the campaign to make sure we don't have cladding on buildings that can go up in flames and burn people in their homes has been partially successful for the future, but it took a huge amount of pressing, and the government went a little way, but not nearly far enough, and had to be pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. So those two are examples of successful campaigns where the church and individuals, people of Christian faith and other faiths and no faith, absolutely have changed the agenda. There is now an agenda in England that you don't build housing with that sort of dangerous cladding. And the construction industry, where huge profits are made, have to realise that they can't go on like that. I'll give one example, David, because we want to cover other things. Locally, we had a campaign to make sure Guy's Hospital wasn't closed down. We, in the end, had 3 million people signing the petition and being active. It wasn't just signing a petition, biggest petition ever given to Parliament. It was engaging everybody from the most senior consultants to the patients in the hospital. And in the end, we managed to make sure Guy's Hospital, World Famous Hospital, was not closed by the then Tory government, which had a plan which might have closed it. And I think we changed their mind. That was not the original plan. But 0.0% of our wealth going for overseas aid is a campaign that for many years we thought, well, we fought. Church's huge involvement, local campaigning, not self-interested. We thought we'd won. I'm proud that under the coalition we legislated, we passed a law that says 0.7% should be given every year to overseas development. Sadly and dreadfully, in my view, the current government has gone back on that. There's no excuse. Yes, things are tight, but if things are tight here, they're much tighter in the parts of the world where overseas development money is needed. So I'm afraid we've got to fight that campaign again, and it just shows that you don't always win campaigns forever, and you need to be perpetually vigilant. But I hope they're examples of how community and politicians have worked together and communities have changed the political agenda locally, regionally and nationally.
Thank you for that. So we've had some examples from you, Simon, of campaigns that have worked. We've heard from Izzy that much of what you do is about listening to people, the work that you do with local tenants. So as a joint public issues team, we're really keen to encourage people to be involved with and build up a relationship with their local politicians, with their MPs. But I think one of the things that often we find is that people at a local level say there's a big gap between what's going on in their local communities and what's happening in national government and also in international politics. So is there an implication for our political culture if there is that feeling of disconnect? And have you got any ways in which you think we could bridge that divide?
I think Izzy hinted at the right answer, the key answer to that, which is that nobody should ever feel that they are automatically excluded from being part of the political process. You don't need A-levels, you don't need GCSEs, you don't need university degrees, you don't need wealth, you need life experience. And life experience can start, as Greta in Sweden has taught us, as a teenager. You don't need to wait till you're an adult. Just after this, I'm probably going to have a quick catch-up with a young man called Ryan, who's 18, who's in the middle of his A-levels at the school where I'm chair of governors. We had local elections in London this year, many other parts of the country, as you know. And in conversation, Ryan had been helping us a bit. I asked him whether he would be interested in being a candidate. And he talked to his parents, and when he came back, he said, yes, I would. So, having not thought about it probably a year ago at all, to standing as a candidate to be a local councillor aged 18 was something which a young leader of the future could do. But it doesn't have to be leaders of the future. We have to be very careful that we never exclude anybody. You can have brilliant people engaged aged 70 and 80. The local councillor, one of our two local Liberal Democrat councillors just here, is a woman well into her 70s now. She's perceived as the mother and the grandmother of the community in many ways because she's just the voice, the ear that everybody goes to speak into when they need help, and Maria responds. And often, politicians go and look for people who are a bit like them and don't go for people who may be not like them and may make them a bit uncomfortable. I heard on the radio, no, not on the radio, I went to a funeral yesterday of a lovely lady, Christian lady who died, Third Order Franciscan, who died earlier this year in her 90s. And she was a vicar's wife, but she was a completely unlikely, unconventional vicar's wife in the sense she was a radical feminist, and she did her own thing. And when she was, her husband was a parish priest, her big two campaigns are apartheid, anti-apartheid campaigning, but also supporting the dockers fighting against the closure of the last docks on the Thames. And it's as important for people who are cleaners and dockers and bus drivers and pensioners, or people who are not able to work because of their disability, mental or physical, to be able to engage. So the first part of the answer, David, is never presume, and always think of asking yourself and asking other people whether they ought to be involved. And it doesn't have to be for life. You don't have to be actively involved. I have a younger brother who's a psychologist who was a counsellor for 4 years, brilliant counsellor, a local authority counsellor. At the end of that, he just got engaged and decided the fiancée had to take priority over the politics, which is fine. You can step back. You don't have to, as you will know. You're elected for a term, you can step back. Last point, I think it's really important that we value the tools that link the community to politics. I brought this as an example. This is our local paper. It's called Southwark News. It's an independent paper, been running for 30 odd years, run by two fantastic guys with a small team. In South London, we also have something called the South London Press. Local papers, local radio are absolutely important. Not Trump-type untruths, not false media, not invented social media echo chambers, but papers like this. Headline this week, Stop Bus Cuts. There's been an announcement that there may be bus cuts in London by the Mayor of London. I understand why, because of the budget of TfL. But another way to engage with people is by making sure you talk to them and that it's a two-way conversation. And good politicians of all parties and good political parties don't just get elected and go and sit in their town hall or county hall or House of Commons or House of Lords. They communicate regularly with their voters. They let their voters know what they're doing. They're visible to their voters. They come and see their voters. They let their voters come to see them. And the only good politicians in my book, but good politicians of all parties, are ones who are accessible to the people and don't hide away. The President of Ukraine is an example of a good politician. The President of Russia, who hides away, is an example of a bad politician.
I should have gone first, I think. So yeah, sometimes it can feel like there is a gap. Several things to say on this. One is, first of all, we're all human beings made equal in God. So never be afraid to approach somebody that you see that has a title or an office. But also we know from Scripture that God is looking for people to fill gaps. So if you see a gap, you've got to really be talking to God about whether that gap is there because you're not in it. For many, many years, I grew up in churches that just believed that Christians should not be involved in politics at all, and I will argue why there is a little bit of a gap now, because other people have filled places that maybe God reserved for us. And once I changed my mindset, I had a brilliant Bible teacher that helped me to see the Bible with a different lens, and it was in Exodus 18:21, where you see, God leading his people that had been slaves for so long and then teaching them how to be a society. And in there, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, you find everything about managing money, setting up banks, hygiene, and also how to govern, because politics really is just about governance. Even if there was no sin, we'd still need governance, somebody to organise. And it says, look from among you capable people who fear God, are trustworthy, hate a bribe, and make them chiefs over thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. And in that, you really need to be asking yourself whether you're one that's called to be over thousands, or maybe was a councillor hundreds, 50s, or 10s. And this, I love that this is called From the Bottom Up, because actually I think a lot of what we need is from the bottom up. I believe that communities have the answers for the problems in their societies. They don't always have the voice. And so I would say there's a process where it is about, firstly, somebody caring enough about something. Then you raise awareness. Then you change the culture because of the awareness, and sometimes you need a Simon or somebody similar that you've put there to be your voice and to legislate on it. And you gave an example of the legislation that's been reversed, but on the whole, I think once you get something that's legislated, it is quite hard to have it reversed. Not impossible, but it's quite hard to have it reversed. And that's the order. And you need to be asking yourself, which of those gaps have you been called to fill? And once I got involved, I realised that all political parties are crying out for people to get involved. It can be something like being a school governor, and they're desperate for people to come in and help with the governance of the schools. So if you're frustrated about the education system, you don't like things that are coming through, what being taught, maybe you should be in that gap. We need good counsellors that have the time and can be bothered to actually do the work. If you're not happy with your counsellor, maybe you should be asking yourself whether you're called to stand in that gap. And like Simon said, it's not forever. It could just be for a season, and then you move on and you do something else. There's some really great examples of Christians that have really changed the nation, actually. Current, if you look at charities like Green Pastures, and I actually happen to know the person that set that up, really phenomenal man. As a pensioner, he was so frustrated with the way that his local council handled a budget to eliminate homelessness. And God challenged him through the story of the Good Samaritan. And it said, when I come back, I will pay you what I owe. So he took money out of his savings and bought a flat and put a young girl in there who I think had been living in a caravan with a baby. And from there, he's now gone on to house 3,000 people. 150 churches have got involved, and he's now at the stage where he is engaging with government because he's learnt so much. He takes in ex-offenders, and the reoffending rate nationally is something like 60%. But with them, because they've got the care and the support of the church, it's 10%. So you're enabling everybody to become the person that God intended them to be, and for communities to be safer by standing in the gap. We've also got Home for Good. I believe they started in Southampton when there were loads of cuts and there just wasn't the funding for the fostering and adoption system. And so the churches got together and they said, what's the biggest need in our community? And they decided it was children that just didn't have families to go to, and they built this charity together and cut out a lot of the red tape. And because they were so successful, they had a voice, and they've been instrumental in changing the legislation around fostering and adoption. So it's much easier for children in the care system, or children that maybe not wanted by their parents, to now get homes quite quickly. So there's some really good examples. But even our school system, if you look up Robert Raikes, free education for all just didn't used to be a thing in the UK, but as people campaigned to cut the working hours of children, I think that means I've said enough.
We haven't done that on purpose.
No, don't worry.
We're back, I think.
To cut working hours for children, and then they cut it some more, and then children had Sundays off, and the church decided they didn't want anyone to be illiterate and not be able to read the Bible, so they set up schools, and now everybody goes to school and children don't work. But that started with one person just deciding they wanted to do something. I would say, if you look through history, there's definitely that path of caring, raising awareness, changing culture, and then the step of legislating. So Christians should definitely be involved, and it's whether you're called to be over thousands, hundreds, 50s or 10s, but you're definitely called.
Thank you both for that. And there's some, hearing the call to be involved, filling the gap, as you say. I just want to maybe just dig a little bit deeper into this. Just this week, I was part of a webinar that was talking about rage and redemption. And a theologian said that rage and redemption are two sides of the same coin. And the reason that the prophets raged was because things weren't right, and they were raging for redemption. And I just want to ask the question, how do you see it from a political point of view when you get local people who are raging about what they see as an injustice? And do you feel that the redemption might come through maybe local or national government?
I think it all depends on how you rage. I found that once I got elected, people forgot I was a human being, and some people are just really, really nasty. They're never on the top of your list to give that return call. If you hear a voicemail, someone said something really horrible about you, or they've typed something really horrible, you think, I'll have a cup of tea first before I answer that one. And there's righteous anger. You know, Jesus was angry at injustice, and at one point he sat in a corner, weaved a whip, and whipped people out of the temple. But it was the people that should have known better that got that. So there's a place for compassion as well. The Bible tells us there's righteous anger, and we should be angry about injustice. It's what you do with it. You can be really ineffective and silence your voice and your opportunity to influence by being nasty. Or the Holy Spirit comes with conviction, and he will give you the tools to follow through that thing that you're enraged about. And you will find that often it's revealing some of your anointing, I guess, because things that other people are angry about, you know, I would say, yeah, that doesn't sound great, but it's not what I'm called to, and I'm not as passionate about that as I am with other things. And I would just say, like, I can point you to somebody who may be a better person to partner with, but there are things that my friends tell me that you didn't do anything about this until I said to you I had a housing problem, and then suddenly, you know, you dropped everything that you're doing because I'm really passionate about social housing. So does that answer the question? Yeah.
It does. Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, I'll start. Where is he finished? I mean, Jesus clearly got angry. And Izzy's right about that. The most quoted example is indeed when he overturned the tables of the money changers in the temple. But he was angry at other times. He was angry with the Pharisees. He was angry in some of his debates. And he began to ask questions, clearly from when he was a teenager or a youngster, and then was angry. He was angry in the preparation before his death, and in all those very difficult passages in the Gospels. Foreshadowing what should come. There was clearly anger about the sin and the wickedness in Jerusalem and so on. And the prophets were often angry, and rightfully angry. And many of the stories of Cain and Abel, there's anger. I mean, the Bible is full of anger. Paul was angry often and wrote angrily. So rage is a perfectly appropriate sentiment. And I think sometimes we have to work out the best time. Sometimes we're naturally angry, and we're just angry, and we are angry for a righteous reason, and we should do that. We have to then remember that we've got to try to come up with the redemption. We've got to try to help God as agents of His through the Spirit to achieve the redemption. And perhaps I can give two examples. I was involved a lot in anti-apartheid things, and I had two very good friends, one Labour friend, Peter Pike, who sadly just died, who was the MP for Burnley, and one Conservative friend who, thank God, is very much alive, Alistair Burt, who was the MP for Bury for a while and then reappeared, having been defeated in Bedfordshire, and has recently stood down. And Alistair and Peter and I went to South Africa in 86, 88, 90, 92, 94, I think. And we went as three Christians from different parties, supported by somebody, angered about apartheid, to see if we could do anything. And when we went there, we were even more angry. When we saw it for the first time in practice, we were even more angry than knowing about it from here. I remember being in tears on my first night in South Africa, having seen the Crossroads Massacre. But we resolved that what we'd do, we wouldn't just be angry and go and collect information. We would seek to engage with people at all levels of the community, so black leadership in the townships and the Dutch Reformed Church advocates of apartheid, and the people in the government, Botha and de Klerk and all those people. And we engaged with them, and we challenged the fact that they were saying that the Bible justifies apartheid. We went and had conversations face to face with them, and we sought to pray with them. And I'm convinced that one of the reasons why a miracle happened in South Africa, which is that there was not a civil war, was because people like Mandela and people like Tutu and many people turned their anger, their righteous, justified anger of people oppressed for decades, entirely because of the colour of their skin, into a constructive and engaged dialogue. And no people were more worthy in the end of things like the Nobel Peace Prize than de Klerk and Mandela, who were willing to bridge that gap. And the second example is the current example. Prince Charles, it says on my radio today, has said privately that he doesn't like the government policy on sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. I haven't any idea whether that's his view or not, but the man from the Times believes it's a well-sourced piece of information. I'm glad if that's what the heir to the throne thinks, because it shows he has a heart for these issues. And the Archbishop of Canterbury, in his Easter sermon, and others preached about that. I'm not sure the church nowadays, often enough, collectively, the church, our churches together in Britain and Ireland, and other faith groups, the Abrahamic faiths with us, are angry often enough. And Marsha's example is a really good one. It is a scandal that in one of the richest countries of the world, there are so many people at night on the streets in all of our big cities. It is a scandal that so many people live in no adequate accommodation when there are people who have 2, 3, 4, 5 houses in this country and around the world. It is a scandal that there are so many children brought up in such difficult circumstances that even with the best parenting and the most loving and caring parenting, it is almost impossible. It is a scandal, and we ought to say so, and I'm not sure the churches are nearly angry enough. And I heard any questions which came from Guernsey slightly randomly last night on the radio, where the average house price is £565,000 or something like that, or the lowest house. It was so big I didn't really follow the rest of the debate. But we just have to challenge some of these things, and we need to be much better. I'm an Anglican who is a believer in disestablishment. I don't believe in an established church. I was confirmed, thank God, and in the church in Wales, which is disestablished. So I'm authentically a disestablished Anglican. So I'm much more comfortable about that. I can see the merits. I love the Queen. She's doing a fantastic job. She's a deeply spiritual woman, and I honour her 100%. But the church ought not to be part of the establishment. And we need somehow to get to the place that even if, because it would take so long to legislate us out of being an established church in England, it took years to get the Welsh church to be disestablished, and in Ireland too. We need somehow to get the church to be much more effective. And it's not just archbishops. I'm a big fan of the archbishop, but he went to Eton and he went to university, and he therefore has, all the qualifications to be able to speak out intellectually, but we need people on the streets to be there with him, making the voice heard. So my challenge to all of us and you, nobody's exempted, that we absolutely need the rage to be more often, but always seeking to deliver the redemption, asking God's intervention to do that.
Thanks very much, Simon. I think you'll both be glad to hear that, as the Joint Public Issues team and as the churches that are part of this, we have a vision of politics that's characterised by kindness, listening, and truthfulness. But I think it's very also important, and it's very good to hear, the place of rage that we need to be in. Izzy, I'm just wondering. Simon talked a little bit about that voice that the church has, and mentioned the Archbishop of Canterbury. Obviously, got a bit of flack for speaking out. How do you see the church's role in political debate?
Wherever there's an organised group of people with one vision, you will always have influence, you will always have power. But your voice needs to be heard. I've never, ever, as a councillor, had any of the churches in my ward say, will you come and speak to the church? Will you come and meet our people? Will you come and hear what's important to us and see the support that we could give you if you could sort something out? And I think it's a real... it's a real waste of potential and a real waste of the influence that God has naturally given the church just because of the way that it's structured. And I think also we bring godly wisdom to the debate. So even if you don't think you're that good on your own, you have a relationship with God, and he tells you if you ask him, he will give you the answers. And that you can see throughout the Bible, you know, the people that he's chosen. Moses with a stutter. Joseph is a story that I just really, really love. I have actually done a sermon on this, so I won't do it today though. Of all your life experience, you spoke about everywhere that you're at, and if nobody ever hears that, you're not going to get better. And I do believe a lot of us are going to stand before God, and he will say, you had the experience, you had the voice, you had me, you had my Holy Spirit, you did nothing with it.
So also this week I was in a meeting that Gordon Brown was addressing, and he came out with this phrase. He said, the church is the consciousness of the nation. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. We're called to be salt and light in any situation we go into. So whether that's the green benches, the commons, anywhere that we go, the council, the supermarket, anywhere you work, you are called to be salt and light, and you are called to be the consciousness of the nation.
Simon, would you agree?
Yeah, of course I do agree. And for 1,500 years in this country, we've been blessed with people coming to this country and bringing people to the knowledge of the faith and the knowledge of how to follow Jesus. And there have been many people who have then been the conscience of the nation. Thomas à Becket to the king. I mean, you know, it goes back a long way. And we absolutely have to be, personally and collectively, and again, Izzy's right, many of the people who were called in the Bible were the most unlikely people to be called, and so they doesn't have to come from the leadership. Second point, they can be found in all sorts of places. They don't have to be found in the elected representatives that Izzy is and I was and Marsha is. My friend Patrick Regan, who set up XLP and then with his wife Diane set up Kintsugi Hope, have noticed a gap where the church wasn't doing enough. Youth violence and then mental health, broken people and healing broken people. And probably the best agenda for that is the great set of challenges set by Jesus at the end of Matthew. The prisoner, the homeless, the widow, there's the list. There are the groups we need to be speaking on behalf. We have one of the highest rates of imprisonment anywhere in Europe in this country. Disproportionately black people and disproportionately black men. I don't believe that they were all born and were destined to have that future. That cannot be what God had in mind for them. And there is something fundamentally wrong. So we need to challenge that. And let us be the conscience in our own communities, but let's be the conscience that puts it into the local paper, puts it onto the local radio, puts it into the question times on TV, because we really need the conscience to be heard more loudly and clearly. And for me, I think we should never be ashamed to claim the cross of Christ crucified and to say we speak out in his name. That doesn't mean say the Buddhist and the Hindu and the Sikh and the Jew and the Muslim don't absolutely have the right to speak out, but we can say this is what we have been called to do, and it is our duty to do.
Thank you very much indeed. We're getting to the end of the time that we have, I'm afraid. It's been wonderful to be in conversation with you. I'm going to just set you the challenge with one last question. It's a question that I want you to ask me in one sentence. One sentence, Simon. Can we do that? Yeah, okay. And that's basically, how does your faith shape your politics? Yeah, go first with one sentence, with not a lot of commas in it.
I was going to do a really, really long sentence.
It's very simple. Through the Bible, through prayer, and through other Christian members of family and friends who make God's will for me and for his world very clear. And I just try to live up to that, although I know I fail regularly.
Thank you. Izzy?
What he said in a sentence with lots and lots of commas, I think. No. Oh, you had a few. I'm alive because I became a Christian. There's loads of stuff that's happened to me, and I care because other Christians showed care for me at the time that I need it, and that's what shapes the days when I think I could be having a really nice time somewhere, but actually pay it forward. And I also talk to God about those problems I can't solve, and when people are trying to trip me up, as I understand that I may not have the skills, but God does, and He will not let me be ashamed.
Thank you very much. Can I, just before we thank you with our applause, I would just like to say as well that, Simon, you've asked us to pray for certain people. I think I would like to say we commit to praying for both you, Simon, and Izzy, and all those who give of their time to be part of our political structures and systems, and we will continue to hold you in prayer and thank you for the work that you do in the name of God and in the name of the people that you serve. So it's been a great conversation. Let's show our thanks.